Hey, what's up? Hello, everyone. Welcome into Fantasy Filmball, the show where we turn movies into sports and sports into something we don't talk about here. My name is Matt.
My name is Dyl, and today we are concluding our 2024 Best Picture Revisiting series. We've already returned to all 10 nominees, so if you are new here, consider, dropping that subscription down below, going to check out each one of those videos because we had a guest on for each one. It's very insightful, deep dive conversation on each film about their nominations, their snubs, and our overall thoughts of the film, but we also included a preferential ballot for each one of our guests. So for today's show, we will be going over the results of all those, but you have yet to hear Matt and myself's rankings of these 10 films.
We are going to be getting into those rankings and then talking about how all of this kind of worked out. Now, there's only 12 ballots here, so we can't do a full-on, preferential ballot breakdown. I really wish we had a better idea of the preferential ballot, but we have what we have, and I think it's going to be really interesting how we talk about this. But first, let's talk about the year in general. What do you think about this Best Picture lineup, Dylan?
I've said almost every one of our episodes so far. I love this lineup. My least favorite film here is still a pretty solid 7 out of 10, which even for a year like 2019, there was one movie I wasn't a huge fan of. Recently, it's usually been I love the top half. There's a few films I'm whatever one, and there's usually 2 or 3 films I'm very much the opposite of other people where I respect them, but I don't love them. And this year, I am pretty solid with all 10 of these films being nominated. Obviously, I'm not a perfect 10 for 10 overlap with my 10 favorite films of the year, but I really do like the 10 that we have here.
I'm very soft in my ratings. I rate things very high. Most years, 8, 9 of the movies that are nominated are above an 8 out of 10 for me. I think back to 2019, the only movie that I had rated an 8 out of 10 in that lineup was The Irishman. Everything else was a 9 out of 10 or above. 2020, there were 8 nominees in 2020. 7 of them I gave 10 out of 10s. 1 of them I gave a 9 out of 10. And this year, I gave 6 of these films a 10 out of 10, and 4 of them an 8 out of 10. And what I guess I'll say overall is, while I think this is a very strong lineup, any lineup with 6 10 out of 10 films in my books is incredibly strong. I did go through and rank them on my list of all Best Picture nominees every year. I have a big Letterboxd list with 424 films on it. And I did an average ranking of where does this year land on that list? And despite the fact that everyone's this is one of the strongest years ever, this actually ended up being one of the weaker years in the preferential years, because even though I love a lot of these films, none of them are my top favorite films. Whereas a year like 2010 might have a few stinkers, but it also has 3 films that I would consider in my top 30 films of all time. Same with 2014. Having something like American Sniper, which I think is terrible, is balanced out by The Grand Budapest Hotel, Whiplash, Boyhood, and Birdman, all of which would be in my top 50 Best Picture nominees of all time. So this one, I think the highest scoring film that I have would probably be my number 60 Best Picture nominee of all time.
That is a little bit low, but I think that kind of just goes down to what this year really has been between both of us, where I really love a film that maybe the consensus loves as well, and you still like it, but you're not as strong with it as a lot of other people are, as they will see with your Best Picture preferential ballot here. So, Matt, why don't you kick us off? Number 10 on Matt's rankings.
All right, and I'm going to do this alongside just mentioning where they land overall on this big list that I have, because it's a fun list. So, starting off at my number 10 on the list, and this is going to come in out of 424 Best Picture nominees that I've seen, this is my number 310. It's still a very solid film, but that is Killers of the Flower Moon. Martin Scorsese is a master of his craft. I just feel like there's a lot of half measures taken in this story. It feels like they kind of knew maybe we shouldn't be telling this story. Maybe we're not the right ones to tell it. And at times there's this sort of hesitation to really go all out in the story. I also just keep coming back to, I find that the Osage people are so sidelined in the story, which I find to be quite unfortunate. But again, Martin Scorsese is a master of his craft. There's a lot of stuff to really like here. It just happens to be my number 10.
At number 10 for me is a film that I have been called a hater of. I don't hate this movie. I just don't think it's the best of the bunch, and that's The Holdovers. I mean, my deeper thoughts are in our revisiting episode for that. I had a fun time with this movie. I just have a huge pacing issue, and in a year where I personally think Best Picture is so stacked, having a huge pacing issue does bring you down amongst the rankings. Paul Giamatti is really good. Divine Joy Randolph is really good. Dominic Sessa is my favorite of the bunch, but I don't really leave feeling much of anything, and I know that's really contrary to popular belief with this film. The emotional strings don't really connect for me, and overall, this is the one film in this lineup where I am giving it below an 8, and I am at a just solid 7.
My number 9 film at 298 out of 424 is Anatomy of a Fall. I like a lot about this film. I find it to be a very fascinating examination of marriage and how our actions impact our partners and how much responsibility we can hold for that. It's asking a lot of interesting questions. Sandra Hüller is great, but I feel like the courtroom drama falls a little flat for me. Not for 1 second in this movie do I doubt her innocence, and I think that in a courtroom drama film where you're meant to feel a little bit of mystery around the murder, it doesn't fully work when it never for a second makes me even doubt her innocence.
At number 9 for me, I have Bradley Cooper's Maestro. This is a film I saw back at the Virginia Film Festival, just like The Holdovers, where I didn't really like it, to be completely honest. I appreciated it, but I had a lot of issues with the script. However, revisiting here for our series, I grew to like this film a lot more. I went from a weak 6 to a very light 8 out of 10. Bradley Cooper is doing a lot in front of and behind the screen. I really love a lot of the technical elements of this movie, but due to the way it wants to tell its story, which may really work for some other people, for me, I am at a disconnect.
At my number 8 slot, I am controversially putting Oppenheimer right here. This would be my number 263 out of 424 on my list of overall Best Picture nominees. I have seen this film 3 times now, and each time I'm struck by the formal precision, the mastery, the command of the camera that Christopher Nolan has. However, I've always found that his weakest point is dialogue, and this movie is 90% dialogue. But it is masterfully crafted. I can't deny that. I personally think this is a perfect film in theory, but theory can take you only so far.
At my number 8, I'm also being quite controversial. Past Lives is here for me. This is a film, going into it, I heard so many raves about, and my expectations were set through the roof. And when I originally saw it back in like June, I enjoyed it. Didn't really get it, didn't really connect with it. I like Teo Yu. The rest of the film, though, was kind of whatever to me. Revisiting it here for the series, it's another example, just like Maestro, that did raise in my ranks and went from number 9 up to number 8. I very much resonated with the first hour of this film. I've seen myself in the exact situation our two leads were in with their Skype relationship. Mine was just over Zoom. However, I think the way that Celine Song goes about telling the story once they meet in person, this could be some personal bias I'm bringing in just because of how my situation played out. Didn't find it to be all too... maybe realistic isn't the right word, but it didn't flow very well to me. And I go deeper into it in our revisiting episode. I still really like this movie. I connected with it a lot more, but in a lineup that's so stacked, a solid 8 out of 10 sadly finds yourself in the number 8 spot.
In the number 7 slot for me, coming in at number 260 out of 424, is Barbie. This is a film I've had a bit of a wild ride with, because the first watch I had in theaters, I gave it a solid to strong 7 out of 10. I thought it was fun, but at its core, a corporate product. And then when I rewatched it in the summertime, it jumped up into one of my top 10 films of the year. I gave it a 10 out of 10, thought it was wonderful and subversive. I labeled it at that time a Trojan horse. Depending on what you come into the movie, you're going to get something different out of it. For example, if you go into the movie expecting a toy commercial, you're going to be given a lesson on feminism. If you go in expecting a lesson on feminism, you're going to get a toy commercial. And on a rewatch, I dropped it back down. It's now sitting at a solid 8 out of 10. And I guess the feeling I have overall with it is that while, yes, it is putting these important messages out to young girls who might not have heard them before, I do still think like it's capitalistic, commercialist feeling kind of comes first. It is first and foremost a commercial, and second, it has a little bit of subversive commentary in there, but it is a lot of fun. And Ryan Gosling gives one of my favorite performances of the year, as does Margot Robbie, who, if Emma Stone was not in this year, would be my pick to win Best Actress.
For me, number 7 is Killers of the Flower Moon. I kind of share some of your qualms with the film, but I am a little bit higher on it. I think for a 3.5-hour film, it sure does fly by a little bit, but when you have such awful sound, it makes it kind of hard to connect with the film, at least on my first viewing. My second viewing, I knew what to expect with the sound. It wasn't on my mind throughout, but there were little things here and there that I wasn't loving, even if I really appreciate this film. I think Killers of the Flower Moon and my next film on the list are great examples of appreciating something more than that you actually like it. I think the craft work outside sound on Killers is fantastic. Leonardo DiCaprio delivers such a different performance than we're used to seeing from him. Lily Gladstone's phenomenal, just I wish we had more with her character, and that's not her fault, it's just the nature of the role inside of this film. But Martin Scorsese is a living legend. I will always turn up for a new film, and Kills the Flower Moon was a great one.
At number 6 for me, we are getting into my 10 out of 10s. I'm very liberal with these, so I've given 181 films on my Best Picture list a 10 out of 10. That's quite a lot, I'm aware. And The Holdovers is the lowest ranked of my 10 out of 10s on that list. It is coming in at 181 out of 424 total films. I love this film a lot. I think everything it's doing is absolutely exceptional. It is emotional. It is melancholy. I'm a big fan of Alexander Payne's work, from Sideways to Nebraska to The Descendants, even Downsizing, I love. And The Holdovers is no exception. It perfectly captures the melancholy of the holidays. Those are the loneliest days, the ones where everyone else is happy, everyone else has everything they could hope for. Those are the days when you really start to notice, maybe I'm not where I want to be right now. I think it's a beautiful film with some great performances, especially Davine Joy Randolph. It's a 10 out of 10. It is a very light 10 out of 10. I've kind of teetered back and forth. Is it a 9? Is it a 10? Ultimately, I settled on a 10 because I think I am going to go back and rewatch this over and over through the years. I just love a lot of movies.
Hey, I mean, that's good that you love movies. That's what watching movies is all about. But at my number 6 is going to be the last film on this list. I am giving a 8 out of 10, and just like Kills of the Flower Moon is The Zone of Interest, a film that I think is phenomenally crafted, very impactful, very important, but will I go back and rewatch this all the time? Is it my favorite of the bunch? Did I have the most fun watching? Not really. I think what Jonathan Glazer is doing behind the director's chair is very inspiring. The sound work on this film is one of the best of the decade, if not in recent film history. It's the point of the film that you shouldn't be entertained by watching it, but when we have other films that I think are giving great messages or important messages that are also entertaining, the one that's a little less entertaining will fall down the list, but very strong 8 out of 10 in terms of personal enjoyment, but in terms of like a critical brain, this one would be higher up.
At my number 5 slot, we have another light 10 out of 10, one of those teetering between. This is coming in at number 168 out of 424, and that is American Fiction. This is a film I could actually see climb up the list with time, because I think this is a lot smarter and a lot more cutting than some people are giving it credit for. It, on the surface, is a middlebrow crowd pleaser, but I really do think there's a lot more to this one. I think it's talking a lot about Oscar bait, about what audiences want, and about how art is a hustle. Art is something that we create and put out into the world to make a living, and sometimes it's not shameful to compromise yourself to make a living, to get that bread, to get that dough. It's so funny, it's emotional, and it's got one of the cleverest screenplays of the year. Plus, I have a theory that this is an elaborate prank being played on Oscar voters. I think the satire of this movie goes outside of the movie into real life. I think Cord Jefferson is playing everyone a little bit, and I have the utmost respect for that.
Well, we are kicking off my 9 out of 10s in the Best Picture lineup, and my number 5 is also American Fiction. So I'm just going to echo everything Matt just said there. One of our last episodes in the Revisiting series was going into American Fiction, so here are all of our thoughts over in that episode.
At my number 4 slot, coming in at 134 on my overall list, is Maestro. This is a very controversial pick to be so high up on my list, but I think Maestro is a wonderful film. I find it so cute, so funny, and it's a bit of a strange, absurd look into the brain of Bradley Cooper. Some of the stuff in here is absolutely unhinged, but beyond that, it's also just beautifully crafted. The cinematography, the editing choices, the sound design, gorgeous. There's so much in this. As well, it delivers two incredible performances from Bradley Cooper and Carey Mulligan. I hate biopics so much. I find them to be so dull, so boring, and to see a film that so purposefully shakes up the formula and challenges us to see something entirely different, I respect the hell out of it. Maestro is a big standout this year for me, and definitely the biggest surprise of the Best Picture nominees.
My number 4 is Barbie, and similar to you, I had a very weird trajectory of this film on each watch. My first one, I did the Barbenheimer double feature. I was like, oh, the other one's so much better, but this is still a great time. Solid 8. Rewatched it, loved it so much more, it went up. Watched it a third time, like, okay, I see some of the flaws, let's bring it back down to an 8. But then watching it for the 4th time for this revisiting series, it connected with me so much more. I think what Greta Gerwig and Noah Baumbach are doing with the script is very phenomenal. Gerwig's direction is so inspiring. I just love the tech elements of this movie, and with it being a comedy, it really is one of the most hilarious films of the year. You talk about Gosling, he's great. Margot Robbie's great. But I think the collection of Kens, the collection of Barbies they have, even Alan, are all stealing the show whenever they pop up on screen. And honestly, I could make a debate that Barbie is the most rewatchable film in our Best Picture lineup this year.
I would definitely agree with that. But at number 3, coming in at 101 on my list, is Past Lives. Now, if you'd asked me when nominations were announced, where Past Lives would be on my ballot, it would have been number 9 out of 10. But now, after a rewatch, I get it. I get it now. I'm that Danny DeVito from It's Always Sunny meme where he's crying and saying, I get it. Oh my God. This movie struck me on a personal level. When I first watched it, I feel like, even though I saw it like 6 months ago for the first time, I didn't fully understand what it was going for. And now, instead of seeing this as a romance, I don't think this is a romance at all. I think this is a story about lives not led, but not in the romantic sense. More than anything, I see this as a film about immigration, about moving to a new place, finding yourself torn between worlds, torn between lives. Would it have been better to stay in one place, or can you be happy where you are in the present? And that is applicable in all walks of life and all different aspects of life, whether it's romantic, professional, friendships as well. It struck me on such a deep level that I never expected when I first watched this.
My number 3 in the 2024 Best Picture lineup would be Anatomy of a Fall. First time I saw this, it was one of the most thrilling theatrical experiences I've had since the pandemic. I was glued to the edge of my seat with Sandra in the court, as well as in the family affairs that were going on outside of the court before this film starts to take place. On my rewatch, I did like it a little bit less, but as you see, number 3, it's still up very high. I would give this movie a very solid 9 out of 10. I just think everything that's coming together works so well for what it's trying to communicate. The thrills are top-notch. The drama works. The little moments of comedy, the 50-cent instrumental, all of it is just coming together to make one of my favorite films of the year.
Now we're getting into my strong 10 out of 10s. These are films that I would highly recommend to anyone and would hold up as absolute masterpieces. Coming in at number 69 on my list, can I get a nice?
Nice.
The Zone of Interest is my number 69 out of 424. This is a film that when I first...
Quite the film to have at 69.
I know, right? How appropriate. Anyways, when I first saw this film at TIFF, I got it. I got what it was going for, but it felt like it made its point very quick and overstayed its welcome. And then I kept thinking about it, and I thought about it, and I thought about it, and I thought about it, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. And in fact, I couldn't stop thinking about it until I managed to see it again 4 months later after TIFF, when it finally came out in theaters in December. And at that point, I was blown away, and I expected to be blown away on a second watch because all of the things that didn't fully click for me the first time clicked on this watch. I always benefit from rewatches. Knowing where something is going, I think, really helps my viewing experience a lot of the time. Knowing the end goal, knowing how the themes fit together allows me to pick out the little bits and pieces. And with this film, there's so many bits and pieces to think of. I could go on and on and on for hours. And in fact, I have gone on and on and on for hours, bugging many people in my life about how good this movie is, how deep this film is, how layered it is, why it's so important. This is a masterpiece in my opinion. And if there's one film on this list that in 10 years we're going to see on the Sight and Sound Top 100, it is The Zone of Interest.
My number 2 is my first 10 out of 10 in our Best Picture lineup, and that is Poor Things. Basically, I think this is the best crafted film of the year. The technical elements are just whimsical, they're fantastic, they're beautiful. The cinematography, the range of lenses, angles, types of cameras, all of it just comes together so well. I mean, we have some of my favorite performances of the year. Emma Stone being my favorite overall, Mark Ruffalo as my favorite in the supporting category, and then we have Yorgos Lanthimos' direction, Tony McNamara's such imaginative take of the source material of the novel of Poor Things, and I've seen this film now 3 times. Each time I pick up on something new. Poor Things just comes together so well for such a fun, informative, and just great theatrical experience.
And then I lied earlier. I do have a film over 60 because Poor Things is my number 1, coming in at number 32 overall of all the Best Picture nominees that I've seen in my lifetime. This is a masterpiece. Like you just said, Dylan, I echo all of it. Emma Stone is fantastic. In fact, I'd go so far as to say that Emma Stone delivers my favorite performance of all time. I also think this is the crowning achievement of Yorgos Lanthimos' career thus far, mostly because his films have never been characterized by cheerfulness at all. You know, they've always been very funny, but they're not always the easiest to watch. They're always a little bit cynical, a little bit dark, and Poor Things is a deeply optimistic film. It is excited and joyful about life, and that's something that I find so infectious in this movie. This is going to be the one nominee that I will come back to over and over and over. I love Zone of Interest as much as I do love Zone of Interest. That's not a rewatch film. Poor Things certainly is.
Yeah, I didn't want to go too deep into Poor Things because I knew it was your number 1, but I echo a lot of what you just said there. However, my number 1 of our lineup this year has to be Oppenheimer. Our last episode was a deep dive going in about the film, and I just think Nolan is hitting on all cylinders here. We've seen him do action, we've seen him do thriller, we've seen him do drama, and we've seen him have hints of comedy, and they all come together in this film so masterful. Cillian Murphy, Robert Downey Jr., and the rest of the star-studded ensemble are all in their A game. The editing is immaculate. I love the sound design. Ludwig Göransson's score is perfect. I know I said Barbie is the most rewatchable film, but Oppenheimer would be a very, very, very close number 2. So everyone out there, you have now heard Matt and I's top 10 preferential ballot for this year's nominees. Now it's time to put all 12 of these ballots together, see what will come out on top. We're going to do this in 2 sort of ways. So there's only 12 of us, so a preferential ballot doesn't really make sense to do because we're such a small group here, but I still think we should do it just to see what the results would look like.
I'll walk you guys through the preferential ballot. So if you're not 100% familiar with how a preferential ballot works, essentially everyone submits a ranked choice list, as we've been doing through this whole series. I'll put it all up on screen here. You'll see all of our different charts. So you've got all of our ballots here. So on round 1 of our preferential ballot voting, we have Oppenheimer with 5 votes. Now, it needs 6 votes to win, so only 1 more vote needed in order to cross the threshold and win 50% of our votes. Zone of Interest, however, has 2 votes. And, of course, coming in at 3rd at this point, Poor Things, Anatomy of a Fall, Past Lives, The Holdovers, and Barbie all have 1 vote. This means that the only films without number 1 votes are Killers of the Flower Moon, Maestro, and American Fiction. All of those are automatically eliminated because none of them get that number 1 vote. Now we have to eliminate the other ballots, being all of the ones that have anything other than Oppenheimer and Zone of Interest. So we are eliminating Poor Things, my ballot for Poor Things, but my second place vote is for Zone of Interest, meaning we have 3 Zone of Interest votes. We're also going to eliminate Arno's ranking of number 1 for Anatomy of a Fall. Now, Killers of the Flower Moon is his second pick. That's already been eliminated. And Zone of Interest is his next pick. So Zone of Interest is now at 4 votes versus Oppenheimer's 5. Then Past Lives is Lucas's number 1, and we're going to then eliminate that one. So Past Lives is eliminated. Now his number 2 is Poor Things. That's already gone. Killers is his number 3. That's also gone. The Holdovers is his number 4. Also gone. 5 is Barbie. Also gone, meaning we're going all the way down to number 6 for the Zone of Interest, meaning we are tied 5-5 for the Zone of Interest. But the next 2 votes bring it home for Oppenheimer, because Josh has the Holdovers ranked number 1. That is eliminated. Killers 2. That is eliminated, meaning number 3 being Oppenheimer brings it to that 50% mark, meaning that Oppenheimer is the victor. Let's just bring it home and go to the last ballot here, which is Sierra's ballot. She has Barbie number 1, eliminated. Poor Things is number 2, also eliminated. If we go all the way down past Maestro, American Fiction, and the Holdovers to number 6, that is Oppenheimer, meaning Oppenheimer comes in with 7 out of 12 votes, while the Zone of Interest has 5. That is our preferential ballot. Obviously, having so few votes is not ideal for a preferential ballot system. At the Academy, they have thousands and thousands of votes, which means that you can really start to peel off those groups instead of what we had to do here, where we peeled off 5 ballots at once for different movies. But the results speak for themselves. Oppenheimer is the winner.
On the flip side, since we had such few ballots, we're going to flip things over and to totaling up the averages of the rankings across all 12 ballots. Obviously, in all these films, with the exception of 2, we're seen across all 12. So when we crunch all these numbers, working our way up from the bottom to top, Maestro lands in 10th place with an average ranking of 7.82, which, I mean, it had a few bright spots. I mean, Matt, you gave it number 3, it had a 4, but it did have, let me count this up, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 10th place votes.
Those 10th place votes really doomed Maestro to fail at the very end, but still 7.82 is a little bit of a higher placement than I would have expected from what is so clearly the consensus number 10 pick. The number 9 pick we have here, averaging all 12 ballots, is American Fiction. This comes out with a total of 6.83 in its placement, and that's because a lot of people ranked this number 9. We have 2 10th place votes here and 4 9th place votes. So even the people who voted for it in number 4, number 5 could not help it up past that point. And again, the highest that this got was number 4. It was mostly a 5th place pick. So yeah, it's falling pretty low there, performing not very well on that preferential ballot.
Then at number 8 is going to be the lowest film to receive a first place vote, being Barbie. In our very first episode, Barbie got that number 1 vote, but couldn't really sustain the momentum. It had a few number 3s, including from myself, and then some 8s, some 7s, and it ended up landing at a 5.58, so higher than American Fiction, higher than Maestro, but not really competing for that number 1 spot.
And shockingly close to the Holdovers, which ended up with a 5.5 ranking on our ballots. And that's coming from one number 1 slot, balanced out by your number 10 slot, Dylan. But for the most part, the Holdovers is ranking on most ballots between 3 to 5, with a few exceptions there. One person put it at number 9, one person put it at number 8. It's got a good spread here, but no overwhelming love at the top or bottom of the charts.
Anatomy of a Fall is our next film, which kind of has a similar trajectory to the Holdovers. It does have that 1 first place vote, but it also has a 10th place vote. It averaged out to a 5.25 on the scale. I mean, it had a number 2 placement, but it did had a few number 7s and a lot of number 6s, and in addition to a number 9 to go along with that 10th place ranking.
Now we're getting into our top 5 here, and Past Lives comes in at number 5 with a total ranking of 5.12. This comes from 1 first place vote, balanced out by a number 10, a number 9, a number 8, and a number 7, and a number 6. But hey, there are 2 second place votes for this film and 2 third place votes, which definitely pushed it up quite a bit higher. So this is our number 5, and after this we're getting into the really strong territory.
Yep, everything from this point out received a 4.75 or lower, and it's kind of funny when you compare this ranking to the preferential ballot, because the Zone of Interest lands in the 4 spot here. It had those 2 first place votes, it had some number 2s, but also racked up some number 8s, some number 7s, some number 6s, as well as a number 9, for a total score of 4.75.
And I find this one Such an interesting placement. Killers of the Flower Moon is in third place here with a total score of 4.33, despite not having a single number one vote in our rankings here. Now, this comes out because, obviously, most people in our ranking, aside from me, voted for this as their number 2, number 3, or number 4 film. In fact, this has 3 number 2 placements, and it's got 1 number 3 and 2 number 4s. So this one did really well on the average, on the upper end. Even though people weren't picking it as their favorite, almost everyone had this as coming very close to being their favorite.
You and I were actually the 2 lowest scores here, with an addition of another 7th place vote. But now we have a top 2 separated by under 0.3 points between these. And following in second place is Poor Things. It received 1 first place vote, but I count 1, 2, 3, 4 second place votes, and only received 2 votes below the placement of number 5, with 2 8th place. So it performed pretty well across the board. Obviously not a lot of number 1 support, but not many people put it at the bottom of their ballots.
And the number 1 in terms of average placement on our preferential ballots is, of course, Oppenheimer. This ended up with a score of 3.67, which is actually shockingly low when you consider that this had 5 first place votes. Even though it had 5 first place votes, most of the other votes, people who didn't have it number 1 had it number 6, number 7, number 8. And so while it's not the bottom of the ranking, if you don't have it number 1, you probably don't have it top 5 is what it seems like.
In conclusion, that is how our ballots all stack up. If you look at it with a preferential or an average of the rankings, Oppenheimer does come out on top. That's going to bring us to the end of this episode. If you made it this far, consider, a like, a subscription, a comment helps with the algorithm, helps you stay close to us, as well as seeing our future content here on the channel. We're about to kick off the award season for 2025. Sounds crazy to talk about, but it'll be here before we know it.
And as always, thank you so much for watching, everyone. Let us know what you think about this year's Best Picture nominees in the comments down below. My name is Matt.
My name is Dyl, and this is Fantasy Filmball.